that, warrants the kind of scientific scrutiny that we all who make mead know that it actually does warrant. And so there's, since UC Davis is taking an active interest in it, I think that's going to change.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially for those of us at home. I mean, I can see the wonderful advantage that, meaderies would have and that, something like that. But, there are those of us at home who could benefit from that type of information as well.
Absolutely. And that's one of the major reasons that I, started looking at things and looking at wine publications and took wine courses up at UC Davis, is because while mead making and wine making are their own little worlds, they're conceptually, there are things that are very similar between them. The process of fermentation, the staggered nutrient additions, controlling temperature, keeping track of your temperature, your pH, your sugar, throughout the fermentation, and various other techniques that go into the making of wine and mead, that, translate to a better end product. And so, while again, they're different beverages, conceptually, there are techniques that you can learn from winemaking and bring over into mead making that are wonderfully helpful.
Yeah. Bernard Smith goes on to ask about certain honeys that are known for their butter or nutty flavor. Presumably, requires folks to have developed a palate educated enough to identify flavors and aromas blind. I'm not quite sure what he means by blind, but...
Yeah, I don't really know what he's asking by blind either. And, I guess at a starting point, as you mentioned up above, that, my recommendation would be to get hold of the Honey and Pollination Center up at UC Davis and get that aroma wheel from them and start from there. I mean, blind is like, this is where it's a little bit different. If you don't have the vocabulary to articulate specific aromas and flavors, it's not something that you're going to be able to do out of the gate. If you don't know that the buttery flavor in Chardonnay is a byproduct of, diacetyl as a result of malolactic fermentation, then you're not going to be able to articulate that. So you have to go through and learn. There's no shortcutting that kind of thing. You just have to sit down and do the reps. And speaking of doing reps, a palate is just like a muscle. You got to exercise it regularly to keep it in shape and to tone it up and to keep it, working all the time. So,
well, and not all honeys are made the same either. I mean, I've had wildflower honeys that are wildly different, and I think obviously it depends on where those flowers. Where the bees, got the pollen from, what kind of flowers, where those flowers were. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that come into play. So, I mean, just, that's got to have a whole, a part in this as well. I mean, because I know that not all honeys taste the same. Orange honey here tastes different than orange honey from Florida. I've heard people say that.
And it tastes different from orange, I'll say citrus honey from Arizona, from Nevada, from Northern California, from New Mexico, from all across Texas. It's different from everywhere, just like grapes taste different from, different areas and different geographic regions that have different kind of soil. That's the nature of a living organism that's, an organic organism that is developing, converting the nectar into honey. It's going to be different. It's going to be different with the different bees too. I mean, the biology of the bee is going to make it different. So,
yeah,
it's, you can have. I'll go back to music. You have 3 piano players, sit them down and have them play a C scale, and they'll all sound different. It's still a C scale,
right?
But they all play it differently.
Right. And lastly, Bernard Smith asks, how do they master it? He thinks that developing that kind of a skill would improve his mead making. Yeah,
it really is. I mean, how do they master it? Practice.
Yeah.
Another thing that people don't want to hear: practice, practice, practice. People say practice makes perfect. I totally disagree with that. If you practice things incorrectly, you're just practicing mistakes and you'll never be perfect at it. Perfect practice makes perfect. Practice it perfectly, that will make it perfect.
Yeah. And that goes back to making those traditional meads over and over and over until it becomes second nature and, you know what you're dealing with. It seems like a good place to start, you know.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'll share something that illustrates that to me pretty well. At the Mesa Cup International, when we're judging traditional meads, it's very apparent that a lot of people don't spend a lot of time, both home mead makers and commercial mead makers, with traditional mead. And I'll tell you why. There's nothing to hide behind there. Any little error is right out there front and center. Any, reductive aroma, any off flavor, any odd looking colors, they're all out there for everybody to see. And to me, somebody can make a great mellow, but if they can't make a traditional mead, I gotta wonder how they got to that great mellow.
Yeah, which, might have been a 1 in a million shot, one of those got lucky kind of deals,
Absolutely. And, I'm not saying that's the case with all of them, but there's some of them that, where I've had the occasion to taste traditional and to taste, some of their mellows and things like that from different mead makers, both home and commercial. It becomes obvious that, one did not equal the other. And I was kind of like looking at how did we get from A to B to C on this one, because there's no, in any way, shape, or form, kind of logical progression from one to the other. One was on the very low side, the other was on the very high side. And I'm like, how did the quality at the base product come out low while the quality on the top product come out tops? And, I'm just wondering, how they got from A to B on that one.
Well, I think and what we're talking about here, I mean, I can draw this line from everything we've discussed tonight all the way back to something you said here a couple of weeks ago about, you're going to go out and buy. I mean, like me today, I went out on a honey run. I went up north of Ventura, went to Heritage Honey, and I came home with 2 pails of orange, 24 pounds, $100 worth of honey.
Right.
Stopped at a fruit stand on the way home, and I picked up another 6 pounds of sage honey. I spent $130 on honey today. So,
right.
And then I know that there are some out there who are going to come home and, dump it in the fermenter and expect a miracle. And it's like, that's mistreatment as far as I'm concerned. I mean, if you're going to go out and spend that kind of money, you're going to invest that kind of time and money into this. I mean, it helps to be able to do it right. And I mean, I know more about mead now in the last several weeks, just dealing with the Ask Oscar, doing these shows, than I have learned in the last 6 months, even since last January when I got started in this. And, as you and I talked about the last time we were together, there is some misinformation out there. I'm not going to say it's incorrect information. They're just not telling you the whole story when you go out and look at some of these recipes that are scattered all over the internet. So, we're talking about, they don't talk about aromas. They don't talk about, the smell, the flavor, the taste. They don't talk about pairing honeys with different yeast, learning the characters of the yeast and even the other ingredients, whether you want to put prickly pear with the wildflower or cherries with orange blossom. I mean, there's a whole lot more to it than just, dumping a pail of yeast in a fermenter and throwing the yeast in,
Right, exactly. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and thanks, Bernard Smith. I certainly got an eye-awakening experience out of it. I always do when I'm sitting here with Pete. The luxury I have being in the studio every time these things are recorded is I can sit here with paper and pen and take notes. We've got a question. This comes from a premium patron member, and thank you, Mead B, for becoming a patron member. I don't know whether this is a question or a statement or what, but these batches were made with honey harvested early midsummer, so it's a mix of clover and wildflower recipe for the 3 batches. She's I don't know if she's questioning the starting gravity with the SG at 1 point. I guess that's 1.1010.
Yeah, they're asking, is that right? And I'm like, well, I couldn't really tell you. I wasn't there. So, the follow-up question there is maybe I need a lesson in reading my gravity. And I'm like, Yahtzee. Again, it's like you have all this great equipment, but you go out and you do your first experimental batch on some really expensive honey. And my advice has always been, if you've never fermented anything before, you got your new equipment, fill it up with water, run through the sanitation and everything else like you normally do at those levels that you use to sanitize your equipment, either with iodophor or Star San. You can still drink the water even after you use it to sanitize the instruments that are going into it. Fill your fermenter up to 5 gallons with water. Sanitize your hydrometer. Spin it into it. Take a reading. Fill the graduated cylinder that you've got up that you bought with your hydrometer. Spin your hydrometer in that. Take another reading. Get used to it. Take your long-handled spoon, set it down in there, and get a Sharpie marker, and at the water level, at 5 gallons in your bucket, put a little mark on your long-handled spoon and write 5 gallons. Take off a gallon, go down to that, put another mark on there and say 4 gallons. Do that all the way down to a gallon. Now you know how much is in your bucket. All you have to do is stick your spoon in there, and if it falls onto one of those marks, you know exactly what it is. If it falls in between them, you know it's like a half or a quarter or 3/4 or whatever. A real quick, dirty, not totally accurate, but accurate enough to get you into the ballpark so you can use your instrumentation to measure it. Get your little, get your racking cane. Rack some water out into another pail. Practice racking. Practice. If you've got an auto siphon rack, that's great. Just give it a push. Have the other one, down below it so gravity can take over and, rack back and forth to them a couple of times. Get used to doing all this stuff before you start experimenting on your hard-earned dollars that bought you that really expensive honey.
Right.
Once you're used to taking those readings and, checking everything out, then go ahead and mix that must up. And you'll be surprised just how easy it is the second time around when you're actually using honey than when you're not. And, then the water that you got left over, you can put on the plants or you can take it in the house and, drink whatever's in there because, again, you're not using enough sanitizer on the instruments that you're putting into it to do anything other than just make sure that you're not contaminating it. So,
yeah,
at least you've got, a bucket of water there that you can use in the house if you really want to, or go put on the plants or put in the dog bowl or, walk outside, find one of your neighbors that looks like he's pretty hot and dump it on him,
Yeah.
It's up to you.
The other comment here being made by Mead B is using, and this kind of throws me because she talks about, or I don't know if it's a she or he, but Mead B talks about using common staggered nutrient and degassing process. I understand the degassing part, but there is no common staggered nutrient. Isn't that dependent upon where you expect your final gravity to be? Isn't that how you put your staggered nutrient schedule together?
Yeah, this is one of the things that I'm finding kind of curious is that people go standard nutrient addition, and like you said, there's no such thing. It is however you're going to add nutrient for the batch that you're making at the moment. People go, let's do a staggered nutrient addition according to this schedule or that schedule. And that's all well and good, but, if you didn't develop the schedule yourself, you probably need to take a look at what it is you're doing. Figure out how much nitrogen you're adding with those nutrients, and if your honey really needs that. Is your fermentation going well? Then why do you want to, if it is, and it's going along, and, you've just made one addition at the beginning, and fermentation's clipping along at a real good pace. Don't be adding stuff to it.